Hello. Hi, if we can ask everybody to take a seat. And we'll ask the candidates to also come up to the front.
Rami, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Good to see you. Yeah, you too, Paul.
Please go ahead and have a seat. Thank you. So I would like to welcome everybody and thank you all for coming on behalf of the Sydenham District Association. First, we'd like to just introduce some of us who sit on the SDA board. So my name is Tara, and I'm one of the board members. We have Martha, who is the chair of the board. We have Jane, our treasurer, Laura, who also is another board member, and Donna. There's quite a few more of us who weren't able to be here tonight, but we thank everybody for coming, and we appreciate that you want to be involved in this evening tonight and getting to know the candidates for councillor of this district. To begin, let us take a reflective moment to acknowledge that we are situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. We acknowledge that the original inhabitants of this traditional territory and their deep and ongoing connection with the land. We give thanks for the land where we live and call home. We come together this evening as neighbors and friends with a collective responsibility to understand more about the leaders that we choose to guide us forward peacefully. Through this act of communicating with each other, we work toward creating a better home for all who live here through our shared and distinct cultures, interactions, and intentions. We encourage everyone to reflect on the relationship that we each hold with this land, how each of us came to call this home, came to be here tonight, and how our relationship connects with the past. The SDA would also like to point out that we've prepared a small survey for attendees to fill out if you'd like to. They were at the front table. You can return these at the end of the evening. The SDA is your neighborhood association, and we look forward to having as many neighbors as possible join us. We are looking for people who would like to contribute, especially to the newsletter, which we find is popular but takes volunteer time. And now, let's move on to the focus of the night. We'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's All-Candidates Meeting and thank him for being here, CKWS anchor Bill Hutchins.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Be here. Now, if you'll turn to page 3 of your hymn sheets, we're going to sing Vote This Way. Actually, this is a lovely venue, isn't it? The Spire. Great to be in here, and I know it's been used for multi-community purposes, and they get some musical performances in here from time to time. In fact, I think I'm seeing the Bee Gees tribute in here in a few months, maybe. Good evening, everyone. And thank you to each of the 4 municipal candidates for coming out on our stage tonight. We have Paul Charbonneau, Conny Glenn, Rami Maassarani, and Peter Stroud, the candidates in Sydenham District. We'd also like to thank each of you who came out tonight to be part of this event, and for those who are going to be watching later via video. Thank you to all for being part of a strong and fulsome democracy. This debate is paid for and organized by your Sydenham District Association, commonly called SDA. And my role is to make sure that all the candidates will have equal time to make statements and answer questions. So let's go through the format of the debate, just so the rules are clear to everyone. There are a few of them. So questions from the audience will only be accepted in written form. That's why there are no microphones out there. These questions may be modified to merge similar questions or to clarify intent. I already have some questions ready to go. I will read aloud those questions to the candidates, and each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond to them. I may interrupt or ask follow-up questions along the way. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement about themselves. The order of introductions have been drawn randomly, and later the questions that will be asked, I'm going to rotate through your alphabetical order of last name, okay? Let's follow that rotation through. And at the end of the meeting, each candidate will be allotted 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes for a closing statement. So the estimated time of the meeting, give or take, is about 95 minutes. The SDA has rented this hall from 6:30 to 9:30, so you're welcome to speak to neighbors before or after the meeting. Now, we ask that all candidates and audience members be respectful of one another and stay seated until the event is over. We also remind the candidates that SDA membership fees have paid for this event to happen. It is a volunteer and community event. Keeping time, of course, is an important factor in events like these. We have timekeepers Tara and Vera in the front row there. They will have a watch, and they are going to keep time, alerting myself and the candidates when it's time to stop talking. So, yellow card means you will have 30 seconds left in whatever portion of the meeting that we're in. The red card, when they hold that up, it means that your time is up. So you get a pretty good idea. When you see the yellow card, you have about 30 seconds left. See the red card, you know, unlike soccer, you won't be kicked out, but basically I'll just say, you know, wind it up. So I hope the rules are clear. Let's start with the opening statements then. So 2 minutes each. This is from the random draw, and we're going to start with Rami Maassarani. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. So, hi everybody. My name's Rami. I just want to start by thanking the Sydenham District Association for hosting us tonight and thanking everyone for taking the time to be here. Certainly much appreciated on all counts. So, a little bit about me. My family and I immigrated to Canada in the early 2000s. I spent the better part of my teenage years in Ottawa before coming to Kingston in 2008. So I could attend university. I studied civil engineering at Queen's, where I completed my undergraduate degree in 2012. I then went on to complete a master's in civil engineering with a focus in environmental engineering, also at Queen's, which I then completed in 2015. I enjoyed Kingston so much that I really wanted to stay here. I tried to find a job and was lucky enough to find employment at the municipality next door in Loyalist Township, where I work in the engineering division. So I'm currently employed there as an environmental engineer, and my portfolio primarily involves infrastructure projects around water and wastewater treatment plants for the most part. However, because I work for a smaller municipality, my portfolio is quite large, and I've also been involved in a lot of the township's sustainability initiatives, like developing the climate action plan that was recently passed there. And I am also providing a lot of assistance to other departments and divisions such as public works. So really that's given me a pretty good idea of how municipal government works and how it impacts everyone's day-to-day lives and how it can impact it for the better. So that really contributed to why I wanted to run. I want to make Kingston better. Kingston is my home, it's my family's home, and I just want to contribute to change. We are facing a lot of issues as a community, from climate change to housing to the cost of living. So I just want to contribute to making, to that positive change and just create a better present for all of us and a better future for everyone who's coming after us. Thank you. I'm looking forward to tonight.
All right, thank you. And next we have Conny Glenn.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for attending this evening. It's very heartening to see so many people out. In this age of political cynicism, when we engage, we're showing that we still believe in the fundamental understanding of what democracy is, and that's about us getting together to discuss and debate the things that we are taking on. So I'm going to look forward to the next 90-95 minutes of getting to know you, but also having you get to know me. And I'm going to ask you straight out to vote for me because I think that we need a bit of a change, and I'm going to ask you to vote for something a little different. I'm going to ask you to, not vote for having to fight for things, not vote for having to have apologies go on, not to vote for the status quo, but to vote for a change, to vote for having someone who is going to bring the breadth and depth of experience to the table to make those changes possible, to be able to work with all of the other people in the community and on council to make those changes happen. So just by way of brief introduction, I am a business owner. I have owned my own national ergonomics consulting company for the last 25 years. It's now headquartered here in Kingston, Ontario. I have sat on the Board of Public Health, most recently here in Kingston. I have co-chaired National Health and Fitness Day here as well. And I've sat on a number of different boards and organizations, and I want to bring that breadth and depth of knowledge to the table. And I've been intimately involved in regulatory functions at the provincial level, working up and down through the various levels of government. So one of the things that's going to challenge this city is the fact that we are going to have better relationships with those other levels of government. A lot has been downloaded to our municipality, and we need to make sure that we have good partners. So I look forward to the next 90 minutes and getting to know you and having you get to know me.
Okay, thank you. And next we have Paul Charbonneau.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you, everybody, for being here. The municipal government is the one that touches you most every day, and it's nice to see so many people out here interested in what is going on in their own municipality. I have lived here since 2004 when I had the luck to become the chief paramedic of Frontenac County, operating Frontenac Paramedic Services, primarily in this city. I've had almost 47 years of public service, starting as a young paramedic in downtown Toronto who thought he knew what the world was about at 19, but really didn't. Had the opportunity to travel all over this province. I worked in the James Bay Coast for 7 years. I worked up in Thunder Bay. And I had this opportunity to come down here in 2004, and I took it. But I first got acquainted with Kingston in 1976 when I asked my wife to marry me at the train across from City Hall. So had known this city very well. I have lived in the district for 12 years. I will right out front make sure that the elephant in the room is dealt with. I do not live in this district right now. I am a victim of the housing crisis in that I have not been able to move back into the district since my wife and I split up. But I am very familiar with the district and stay well attached through friends and people I know here. I will ask for your vote. I hope I can win your vote tonight with my thoughts and also at your doors. I have to agree with my colleague, Connie is right, that we are going to need a lot of intergovernmental cooperation to deal with the crises in our city. And I have had almost 30 years of provincial and federal politics of doing that.
Okay, thank you. And next, last but not least, is Peter Stroud.
Hi. Well, I guess you could call me the grassroots candidate. I was born at KGH. My mother walked to the hospital that day. I walked here today. I live a car-free lifestyle right here in the middle of the district. Some of my accomplishments in my 8 years on council have to do with pedestrian safety, improving parks and trails. I was the one that wrote the motion that got the KMP trail finished to the downtown area, and many other environmental type initiatives. But really what drove me to run in the first place and why I still want to represent Sydenham is that my children are still young. And so my daughter was one, my youngest daughter was one when I first was elected. and she's 9 now. My eldest is now 14. We still have several years where they're going to be going to local schools. It's not that safe for them to get to school, so that I still have some more work on that front. And of course, they spend a lot of time outside, as I do, and so the parks can use more improvements. What I represent to you is a strong advocacy voice. I will take all concerns. Those of you that live here know this, that if you contact me, I get back to you. I listen to your concern. I tell you what I can do about it, if anything, and then I do it. There's been results in that sense, and that's probably the source of my support, is that it's based on the action that I do. On the communication side, of course, the council debates have improved steadily in the last 8 years since I've been on council, and that comes from a respectful attitude that I really push for at the council table, that no matter whether you agree or not, we are all representing Kingston together, and we're there to make decisions together, so you can't start calling each other names and so on. Now, I have myself been subject to many attacks, but I don't do that. I don't participate myself in that kind of thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all the candidates. So let's get to the questions now. The first question is kind of a two-part question, candidates. In your mind, what is the #1 issue right now for Kingston at large? And what is the #1 issue in Sydenham District? We'll start with Paul Charbonneau.
Great, thank you very much, Bill. The #1 issue across this city is housing. It's a crisis. It's from the unhoused right through to people who are thinking about moving and selling homes and to move to different districts in the city. It's all being challenged. There are 250 people plus living on the streets of this city. We're about to come into our winter period. This housing crisis is going to need to be solved with lots of cooperation, lots of listening, active listening. My dad used to say to me, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, just do the math. What are you supposed to do more of? I think the #1 crisis or issue in the Sydenham District is the Queens-City relationship. I think that this district has suffered a lot over the last 15 years of the Queens partying. I have been part of the response to that from the very first year that they flipped a car, and I think that Queens needs to step up a lot more than they have in making sure that it is a safe environment. We all like to party, and I'm sure we all were young once at a time, but I think we were very respectful and didn't cause this kind of commotion.
Thank you. Ms. Glenn?
Well, I will agree with Paul in his first answer that I think housing is a crisis across the city. It's also a crisis across the country. And I think the difference we're going to find as we continue this debate isn't that we disagree on the issues, it's that we disagree a bit on how to get to the solutions. And so I think we're going to have solutions that involve multiple levels of government for housing, that also involve the public-private sorts of partnerships. One of the things that we're not really discussing well in terms of the housing crisis is having what I'm going to call deeply affordable housing. If you are on ODSP, you can't afford market value. And until we get to the point where there's a basic income, the potential to even get close to that isn't available. So I'm about solutions, and that's what I hope we're going to really have a conversation about. In terms of Sydenham District, I think it's also about housing. Part of the issues with Queens are being driven by the lack of housing for the students. We don't have enough residences to house them. So Queens has increased that student population without putting in available accommodations for them. And they like to say that they're not in the business of housing, but that's not true. They already have 18 residences. They are in the business of housing. Now, they may need our help with that. It's very costly to build a residence. So this is, again, where what I want to bring to this table is I've got the training and the skills in moderation and negotiation to make a difference with those things.
Great. Thank you. Over to Mr. Maassarani.
Thank you. So I think we'll be hearing this a lot tonight. The number one issue facing the city is very much the same as the number one issue facing the province. It's housing. It's a lack of housing, a lack of affordable housing, and a lack of place for people to call home. So how do we address that? The new official plan and zoning bylaw will do a good job of saying intensification is the way to go about this, which is 100% true. But when we think about how do we go about intensifying neighborhoods, we want to make sure that the concerns of the residents who live in those neighborhoods already are addressed. In Sydenham District, what that amounts to usually is making sure that the character of the resident or the neighborhoods is preserved. So taking that into account and making sure that the rules are being followed as they're written and with the intent that they are being written with, but keeping in mind that we have to work together to make this happen. So as Connie pointed out, as Queens increase, like the number of students at Queens increases, these students will have to find a place to live, and they will want to live near campus, which is Sydenham District. So where do we find places where we can add multi-residential units for them to live and build these units in a way that won't disrupt the character and the feel of the neighborhoods? So again, it's all about collaboration with different levels of government, but also with the university itself.
Thank you. Mr. Stroud.
Thank you. Yes, housing is the number one issue facing Kingston, and it's not by accident. It actually is a global problem, but it's really bad in Kingston. And you'll hear a lot of opinions on what to do about it, but the truth is, if those solutions are the same ones that have been talked about for generations, just build more housing, period, that's not a nuanced enough solution. I had the privilege of assisting an opening of a housing development in Hamilton, Ontario last week. I was there for work, and a friend of mine invited me to this, and I met a non-profit housing developer who was an architect, and he, in partnership with the province and the feds, gets all the funding. He cleaned up an old bakery site that was actually a brownfield, but he got no brownfield funding from the city. He got the money through grants and fundraising, and he converted it, and it was over 180 units of deeply affordable housing right in downtown Hamilton, and that's something we don't have in Kingston at all. We don't have big nonprofit housing developers. So you got to ask yourself why that is. Part of the reason is we live in a little bit of a captive market here. There's a few big players, and they put an awful lot of pressure on council, an awful lot. I could tell you stories offline about the kind of pressures that I face as a Sydenham councillor. This is the district under the most housing pressure in the city. And the answer is not monster 16-bedroom additions. As you know, I fought against that. Expanding one house by 16 bedrooms is not the answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I know it's only a minute and a half, complex subject, but you're all in agreement, so let's go home. But wait, there's more. You did touch on housing and town gown and stuff like that. I think we're going to delve further into these questions a little later on too, so you will get some more time if you feel you can get a chance to tackle that very weighty and pressing subject. But we're going to move on to the issue of leadership, first of all. Sydenham District Association has been active for about 60 years, and it's one avenue that citizens can use to engage and participate in municipal governance and policy decisions impacting our city and our districts, including Sydenham. So thank you to everyone who's taken the time to come here tonight for their commitment to active citizenship. We'd like to ask the candidates, how have you demonstrated active citizenship and leadership in the city of Kingston, and in particular in Sydenham District? How have you engaged or participated in citizens groups and the municipal government? So that's the question, and we're going to start this round with Mr. Charbonneau.
Thanks, Bill. Leadership is something I had to learn very young in my career because you're leading groups of public servants who have a very strong desire to serve the public that they work for. I think leadership is something that is earned and learned over many years. As far as leadership municipally, I've always voted. I always have believed that, and I said in my opening statement, that the government in your town is the one that affects you the most. It's the one that gets the least interest from voters. Within the district, I have been on the board of the Marine Museum. I've been a member of the Sydenham District Association for when I was living in the district, the whole time I was here. I currently am president of the Kingston Historical Society, which of course has a great interest in Sydenham District and all of the historic areas of this community. So one of the things that drew me to this town was the history. I love history. So I've been a Rotarian for many years, so I've worked on a lot of different projects that have helped this city and this community, and I will continue to do all of those type of voluntary leadership roles.
Thank you. Ms. Glenn?
I think leadership is a complex issue. I've led a number of different initiatives over the years. Probably the most significant one of my career spanned 10 years where I advocated for the inclusion of kinesiology to be a regulated health profession. And I had the privilege of becoming the first president for the College of Kinesiologists of Ontario. In terms of what I've done since arriving in Kingston, and just to explain, so I moved to Kingston 7 years ago. My husband retired and we had opportunity to choose where to live after that. And we located here. Puts me close to family. I grew up in Eastern Ontario. And what I did when I got here was I thought, how can I contribute best? What are my skills and talents that I can bring to the table in terms of leadership? So I applied to be on the Board of Public Health. And I had the privilege of serving there for 3 years and was on the Board of Public Health at the beginning of the pandemic when we were watching what I would refer to as a train wreck sort of happen in front of us. But fortunately, we were guided by great leadership and I had the opportunity to participate in that. My other passion is making sure that we remain healthy, and to take pressure off of the healthcare system, it's about prevention. So that's why for the last, since 2017, I've co-chaired National Health and Fitness Day here in the city of Kingston, encouraging us all to get out and to be healthy.
Thank you. Mr. Maassarani?
Thank you. So in terms of leadership, to me, it's about listening with empathy, and it's about listening to the people who don't always have a chance to speak up for themselves. So it's about acting on their behalf and in their best interest and the best interest of everybody else. In terms of what I've done in the community, so I'm fairly heavily involved in the Kingston Rowing Club, where I sit on the board there and as the Vice President of Programs. Part of my role is to make rowing accessible to people in the community, and again, this is anyone regardless of whether or not they can afford to row, and just help educate people through the power of sport and help bring them together that way. And then in terms of promoting municipal government, anyone who knows me will know I can go on for way too long about the role of municipal government and how it impacts everyone's lives. So it's about educating and taking the time to explain the why behind decisions are made. And again, going back to that whole concept of taking the time to listen to people's concerns and then explaining to them the reasoning behind the decisions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stroud.
Bill, do you mind repeating the question?
Sure. How have you demonstrated active citizenship and leadership in the City of Kingston, and in particular, Sydenham District?
Okay.
How have you engaged or participated in citizens groups and the municipal government? Obviously, you're the incumbent councillor, but if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, so active citizenship means, loving your city and doing something about it. That explains why I joined the SDA 4 years before I ran for council. And then I was put in charge of the tree committee with them, planted those 18 trees that are at the St. Mary's site along Alberbeck Street, and they're still there today. I was the vice president of the Ontario Health Coalition, so that's active citizenship, fighting for patient rights and better healthcare system, protecting the public system. So I spoke at the budget talks for the provincial thing. This is again before I was elected. Then I've been on council for 8 years, so then it was kind of busy, obviously. But in my other job, I'm a nurse. I'm a registered nurse. I was a critical care nurse for 12 years, 22 years as a nurse, but 12 years in critical care. And this last year, I've been also vaccinating, in charge of vaccine clinics for the Red Cross. And that's to what Connie said about prevention. the best way to get out of the pandemic is vaccination, so I've been doing that. I think all of those things, they have a common theme. I'm thinking about the world I'm leaving for my children once I'm gone, and that also explains my environmental activism. You have to act, you have to move, you have to work to make a better world, and you have to have clarity of purpose, and you have to keep coming back to the reason that you do it. And for me, it's the love of Sydenham, the love of my city, and of my family and friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stroud, I do have a follow-up question for the whole panel here, but I want to start with you. A couple of times during your tenure on City Council, you found yourself at odds with the Code of Conduct and the Integrity Commissioner. Could you reflect on those experiences? And in light of them, what would you tell constituents who may question your ability to lead and make decisions effectively?
Absolutely. There was a couple of times when I was in high school, I ended up at the principal's office. And at that time, I remember thinking, what do I get out of this? Like, this is a school, what am I learning from this? And so that's sort of how I've approached all the times when I've been called offside, whether it was in a soccer game or a hockey game, or most recently with the Code of Conduct. What happened, because I'm a kind of person that learns the hard way. It's like, I will do what I think is right, and if someone calls me offside, I stop, I listen. And in the case of the first one, it was when I was standing in front of 76 Center Street giving a news interview to CKWS, actually, about a 16-bedroom monster addition, and the neighborhood did not like it. And so I was just speaking from the heart about how, some people come into the neighborhood and do things that they don't seem to care about the neighborhood with their ideas. And that comment is what got me was in trouble with the Code of Conduct. So what did I do? I apologized for those words. The person that made the complaint didn't ever call me to complain to me personally. They just launched a Code of Conduct complaint, so that says something. But I did apologize publicly at City Council for that conduct, and that's how you learn from it as a leader. You learn how you've harmed someone, and you apologize sincerely for it.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Charbonneau, on a similar theme, obviously you're not on council, you're trying to get on council, all of you. But why are you now seeking a role on council and in municipal governments, Mr. Charbonneau? Why now?
I've sat on the sidelines for many years as a civic employee and watched many different councils. It's a difficult job. It's one that you have to seriously think about stepping up for. But I'd always wanted that challenge. I'd always thought that I would want to be part of change. Change is, as Shrek used to say, one of my favorite characters, change is good, donkey. But change needs to be managed well. And I think that I can contribute in the Horseshoe here in Kingston and really bring something to the table of my municipal experience from all over this province. It is interesting when you sit on the outer edge of the council, the observations that you can make about issues that are being discussed and debated. And you start to form your own opinions about them, but you're kind of not allowed to talk about those kinds of things because you're an employee of the organization, and you have your marching orders. And I think it's my time to step up and to be part of change, positive change, and we can all change together.
Ms. Glenn, you also talked about time for a change. What do you mean by that?
Well, the reason that I'm running at this stage is, I'll be honest, I actually enjoy politics. I find it something that is of great interest to me because this is where we have the power to change people's individual lives. And these are the rules that we live by. And so being involved in creating that structure and that fabric for our society is of huge importance to me. My family, my friends, I want them to be able to live in a community where it's vibrant, where it's a great place to be. So in terms of the change piece, what I have seen over the years is how the issues are becoming more and more complex and how we are not getting to solutions. I'm somebody who gets to solutions. I practice as an ergonomist, and what we do in ergonomics is we find the root cause of a problem, because if you don't get to that root cause, you don't get a solution. What you get are haphazard attempts to solve something. So I'm coming at it from a different perspective, where I'm going to find out what the root cause is, I'm going to discuss the solutions, and I believe in working on a collaborative team to do that, and to make sure that those solutions aren't then going to cause further issues downstream, because we often don't go that far when we're talking about our solutions. So that once we're ready to implement, we go and we get the job done, and I think that's one of the things we're missing out on right now, is getting it done.
Right, thank you, Mr. Maassarani. Why is it time for a change? Why you, and why now?
Yeah, so good question. Why me? I've been working as a public servant my entire professional life. I understand how municipal government works, and I understand how it can impact everyone's lives. Very similar to what my colleagues over here have been saying, I just believe that I can help facilitate that change, because I understand that working within the municipal government means working as a team. Council sets the direction for what they would like to see happen in the community based on what their constituents tell them, and staff goes out and makes it happen. I work as a staff member for a municipality. I understand how complex it is, but I believe that that would help me work with city staff to implement the change that constituents want to see. And I'm going to echo something Mr. Stroud said here is, you know, I have a very young child as well. I think I have an obligation to him to leave a better world behind for him when he grows up. And the best way to do that is to get involved. I mean, anyone who knows me knows I don't particularly enjoy the spotlight. I like working in the background and making sure that everything works. The joke I like to give about my job is, if everyone's doing their job properly, you don't know we exist. And so this is certainly out of my comfort zone, but I feel like I have an obligation to do it, both for my child and also for the people who live in the community that I call home.
All right, thank you, candidates. Let's move on to the next question. And this has been touched on already, but you can elaborate now again. Town gown issues. The relationship between the city and Queen's University, and between the student and non-student residents, is a perennial issue in Sydenham District. Parking, property maintenance, noise, garbage issues have been a focus of discussion and frustration for long-term residents of this district for years. In recent years, we've seen the street parties on an unprecedented scale, and a very serious problem with street sign theft as well. So how would you approach these problems? What role does the city have in this situation? And how do you think the situation could be improved? We'll start with Ms. Glenn.
Well, I've certainly heard at a lot of doors that there's great concern over this. And as I mentioned, we need to get to the root cause of the situation before we can get to a solution. So we've seen the university increase enrollment without giving proper consideration for housing. So we have students that I think are improperly housed, and that's at least a part of our problem. And I'm sure what you're going to hear from some of my competitors is that we've got to crack down and we've got to hold everybody accountable. And yes, there is an accountability piece here, and that's where we need to work with the university. One of the things that I've looked into is the Student Code of Conduct, and what we see is that there aren't strong enough sort of sanctions for some of the behaviors that we're seeing. So we need to work with the university to make those changes. But if we think we're going to force it upon them, we're wrong. And this is where, again, we need a mediated approach with somebody who understands how to mediate and negotiate to get to that end goal. As a city, though, we do have levers. And this is where we need to make sure that we are doing proper policing. We need to make sure that we are bringing all of the force that we have to bear onto that situation. But we also don't often enough speak about what's going on with the students and understanding what's sort of at the root of this. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Canadian party life. Yeah. Well, they're inciting the students to do this. And so I've been on the Queen's Party Life Instagram account, We've only got 28,000 students at Queen's, yet we have 38,000 followers for Queen's Party Life. So what we're seeing is we're seeing people come in from out of Kingston to party. And so we have to have a look at, can we crack down on them as well for inciting the behavior.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Maassarani, more talk, more action, a little of both? What?
It's about ownership, right? So I'm a former Queen student, but I am a bit different in the sense that I came here and I stayed. A lot of the students who do come here leave after 4 years. It's just the place they're going to study, it's a place they're going to party, it's not their home. And I think that's where the opportunity for change is we need to help them take ownership over their district, over their home, over their city. And I think that would go a very long way. So, you know, majority of Queen's campus and therefore students who live in the student district are in Sydenham Ward, so it is quite close to home for all of us. But again, it goes back to helping the students feel like this is their home and help them take responsibility over it. We talked about Ontario Party Life, Canada Party Life. So whatever it is, and you know, we have these students coming in from different universities, different towns. Code of conduct doesn't apply to them. We're not expelling them from Queens because they don't go here, right? So that's one part of it. But then I can also say that the university itself, so the AMS, the student-run organization, is doing work to try to curb down the street partying. And I think that needs to be highlighted, and there needs to be a certain level of cooperation between the city and the university itself, but not the university administration, the students. And the student organizations have a much better reach with their colleagues and their peers and much better chance to educate them. So, you know, I certainly think the counselor for the district has a role to play in that, and I feel like I would be well suited for that as an alumni.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stroud. How would you approach these problems? What role does the city have in this situation, and how do you think the situation can be improved?
Yes, well, anyone familiar, I also went to Queen's, and as a frosh I learned the song, "Take out your old Queen sweater, the dirtier the better, and we'll have another case of beer, more beer." I still remember the words. Queen's is a party school and has been for 100 years. Another anecdote, I was in Toronto for a soccer tournament, and I was sitting at a McDonald's, and I heard two early 20-something young men talking to each other, and, "Oh, where are you going to school?" "Oh, I'm going to Queen's." "Oh, party school, eh?" So that's the thing. It's a party school. It's known as a party school. It's advertised by the university administration as a party school. And that is the draw that's bringing people to Kingston. So it shouldn't be any surprise when they're partying. Other root causes, really substandard housing for students, especially in our district, right? Places we wouldn't live, right? The so-called student ghetto houses, you know, 12 bedrooms, no property standards maintained, so on and so on. It's, and lack of amenity space, right? You cram a bedroom into every indoor space. You don't have any indoor amenity space, so then you're going to party on the street, right? The root causes are all there. The very first thing I did after I was elected in 2014, I was at the principal's breakfast, Queen's Principal's breakfast. I stood up, they gave me the microphone, and I lay into them about the rapid expansion for the undergraduate programs. I know there's a financial reason for it, but it is directly what hurts Sydenham District the most, is that rapid expansion. And it was printed in the Queen's Journal and everything. Here we are 8 years later, they're still expanding. So I don't know, I guess we have to keep saying it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Charbonneau, do you have any new ideas to put a lid on the parties, which, as you know, cost taxpayers a lot of money and put safety at risk?
Yes, and Connie mentioned it at the beginning about the university proposes that they're not in the housing business. Well, they are. They have lots of residences, but one of the biggest effects that Queen's has had was recently in 2016-17 when Kingston had a vacancy rate of 2.8%. Queen's upped the intake of international students by 3,000. Our vacancy rate dropped to 0.6 in 1 year. That's our housing crisis, that's part of it. Queen's does need to be part of the solution for proper student housing. I think the city has a role in better policing landlords. Our bylaw enforcement should be looking more strenuously at some of these homes in the so-called ghetto. I've been in some of those homes on calls when I was with my paramedic crews. I can't believe that the kids live in this manner. And I think the safety aspect of it, you know, I recently talked to the Queen's Rector, who I learned is third in the list of authority at Queen's. And we talked a lot about the student partying, and I was quite surprised at his attitude was that perhaps they should be enforcing the really bad, more serious infractions than worrying about the drinking. That shocked me.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, candidates. We'll move on to another subject. This is on budgets, everyone's favorite time at City Hall, right? Like it or not, Kingstonians have become used to substantial annual property tax increases. But these are extraordinary times, and many residents are struggling to pay simple, basic necessities. The city sets out a budget once a year, with property tax levied to take into account anticipated costs, including inflation. So with current inflation rates and the specter of a recession now hanging over us, it is quite conceivable the current fiscal year will end with the city deep in the red. That's always a possibility. So should we anticipate a greater than usual annual increase in the property tax, or will the city seek cuts? As a councillor, what remedial action will you press for when it comes time to review the 2023-2024 budget? We'll start with Mr. Maassarani.
Thank you. So as a municipal employee, I've helped put together budgets. I know how hard it is to do so, and I know how unpopular it is. But the other thing the one thing to keep in mind is that construction price index inflation actually usually beats regular inflation pretty substantially. So if inflation is going up 8%, 7%, we can expect more than that for construction projects, which is what funds our infrastructure. So we spend time talking about our roads and potholes and water mains and all of these things. It is just going to keep getting more expensive to maintain those to a standard that we are used to and that we frankly sometimes take for granted. So that's one aspect of it. But the other side of it is, you know, the city does fund a lot of important programs and social services that are meant to help the people who need the help. So what I would push for is to work with staff to figure out what programs are the most beneficial to the people who need the most help, and try to make sure that those are funded, and then try to be as efficient as possible in prioritizing which pieces of our infrastructure need the most help and need to be worked on urgently, while making sure that we don't defer it. The more you defer a project, the more expensive it gets down the line. So even though you might be only going for a 2.5% tax increase now, it could come back a lot higher down the road and cost the tax base 4% because we didn't do it when we were supposed to. So it's just keeping these things in mind and being realistic behind what we can expect and explaining it to people.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stroud?
Yeah, just like to report to people that probably don't watch all the budget meetings at City Hall that I think of all the councillors, I moved the most budget amendments over the last 8 years. My very first one was to freeze the KEDCO budget at its current level, following a very sort of lukewarm presentation by the former CEO, not the current CEO. The former CEO made a kind of a so-so presentation, didn't justify the budget increase, so I said, okay, I think we should keep you at zero. That budget amendment did not pass, but it did set off a review of the KEDCO committee, which I believe did result in a much more efficient and effective economic development organization, and I mean that sincerely. Other things we did, I second the amendment to double the low volume road repair budget because, you know, as Rami was just saying, it's very expensive, all this infrastructure work, but it's the main avenues, the arterials that get all the money, and they forget about the low volume roads like we have here in Sydenham. So that was something that happened, and still hasn't come to that one block of Earl Street, but anyway, it passed. As far as other, like the way that we're spending money, you can increase efficiency by shining a spotlight on departments, right? So that doesn't cost you any extra money. That's just, you have to scrutinize, that's your role as council, as oversight. You have to scrutinize the departments a little bit more to make them more efficient so you don't have to give them more money every year.
Thank you. Mr. Charbonneau, how many more tax increases can homeowners stomach? What? I just rephrased it a different way.
Okay.
It may be loaded, but
Yeah, I think
that's
so.
what I do.
Yes, Bill, and you do it very well. Taxpayers are always going to see variations in their taxes, and I don't know how many more they can take. I think it really becomes a situation of finding efficiencies. And I can tell you, as a guy who ran a substantial multi-million-dollar portion of a government, I always had a little bit of extra money that I could get rid of if I had to. That's the honest truth of it. So I think, as Councillor Stroud has said, it's shining that spotlight, asking honestly, what can you do without? What programs can we look at not funding anymore, as Rami has said? But we are going to face some very tough times. So the taxpayer will have to bear some of that. The city employees will have to bear some of that. Visitors will bear some of that, and maybe the services available to us. But it's only going to come with cooperation and trying to figure it out. I do not believe that we can stick to a 2.5% in the 23-24 budget. It's just going to be very, very difficult given the economy of this world and coming out of the COVID as we are, and the extra expenses.
Thank you. Ms. Glenn, to lower taxes, you either have to bring in more revenues or you have to cut costs. Which one do you favor?
Both.
How?
So, where I'm going to go with this is I am not a public sector employee and never have been. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't been sitting on boards that have had to oversee public money. So I chaired a board for a youth mental health agency that suffered from decades-long underfunding by the government. And my mandate when I went in to become the chair of the board was to make it financially stable. And we did that, but we had to be creative. I've run my own business for 25 years. I've survived regulatory change and 2 recessions. And you have to look at both ends of it. So I think one of the things to look at with municipal government, just as you would with any other agency, is the human resource area. Right now, one of the things we're seeing across this province, across this country, is an increasing level of disability. And if you don't think that it's hitting here at home, you're wrong. So we've got people that are working in our municipal government that are struggling, and we bear the cost of that. So it's up to us to mitigate that by making sure that we have a healthy team inside. So that's one of the things that I would start to look at, is where can we strengthen internally to make sure that we're not spending money that doesn't have to be spent. But to the revenue side, we need to draw more businesses into this community. We need a larger tax base. That's the bottom line. If we're going to continue to grow, we talk about housing demands, we talk about infrastructure demands, we need to draw them in, and hopefully we'll get a question about that later on, because I'm out of time.
Okay, thank you. Let's move back to the issue of housing. Again, this question is a little more focused, though, for you. If a recommendation comes from planning that requires you to choose from multiple options, how would you prioritize or weigh the following factors? The need to provide affordable housing, economic development, or saving trees? Didn't that just come to council not that long ago? We'll start with Councillor Stroud.
Well, everybody knows I love trees. I mean, it's hard to hide. But the most recent vote on the tannery was more than just the trees. It was about a substandard proposal with a lot of gray area, a lot of vagueness, a lot of undetermined factors. No explanation of how they're going to move the hundreds of thousands of tons of contaminated soil safely. Was it on the roads of Kingston, or are they going to put it on barges on the river? Like, what were they going to do to move 500, 600,000 tons of earth, right? So basically, when a planning application comes, and unfortunately, the current planning department tends to have a pretty low bar about what they think they can recommend. And I find myself with higher standards than the planning department. on certain aspects. On affordable housing, definitely. I always want to see more affordable housing than what they're trying to get coax out of the developer. We all know the private developers never want to provide affordable housing, so you either have to write it into the zoning bylaws as inclusionary zoning and have a 10%, 15, 20% minimum of affordable in every development, or you have to have a planning staff that insists on giving us that community benefit to have it included, and we're not getting either right now. I would say the affordable housing is number one, trees are number two. Economic development will come, but it's used as a pretense to accept substandard applications. Poor applications we should not say yes to. We still have to have standards.
Thank you. Mr. Charbonneau, on the issue of prioritizing affordable housing, economic development, saving trees, on a recommendation that comes from the Planning Committee.
I hate when you're given options that contradict with each other and cause so many difficult decisions, but I think economic development assists with the housing crisis. You know, the building permit fees and development fees that are associated with housing development or commercial development or bringing big industry in really does help with the bottom line and tax increases. And we have to solve the housing crisis. There has to be a continual debate and finding that middle ground of, okay, how can we balance the need of houses to the trees to the economic development? If I have to choose in an order, I would choose housing, trees, and economic development, as Councillor Stroud has. I think that that creates a balance and a goal. The one thing we can always do is plant more trees, but it's harder and harder to find places to put more homes, and especially in this district. We know how precious the trees of this district are. This is one of the most beautiful districts of the city. I never had the opportunity to see this city before the ice storm, but I imagine it was much more beautiful than it was now.
Thank you. Ms. Glenn?
Well, again, I'm going to say we're probably all on the same page with the issue and with the prioritization. But it comes back again to this how. And there seems to be a mindset that is continually going on that these things are mutually exclusive from one another. I think one of the best things that I've heard from an urban planner is that if you set the tone, if you set the rules, that the developers will step into them. And then it's up to us to make sure that we stay on top of it. Most of the problems that I've seen with development going on in this city have to do with the fact that we haven't been overseeing it deeply enough, that we have been allowing exceptions to the rules, so now the exceptions are the rules. So yes, affordable housing certainly is top of the list for me. We have an immense crisis, but again, these issues are complex, so the question is too simplistic for us to be able to, I think any of us, give you the answer that you really deserve to have from us. So I'm also happy to discuss these issues afterwards, as I'm sure everyone else is. But housing, trees, I love a good tree, I'm a hiker, and economic development, but I don't think that we have to be mutually inclusive. I think that, exclusive, excuse me, I think that we can find a way forward to make this work out if we get into that deep dive into the topic that we're talking about today.
Thank you. Mr. Maassarani?
So you've heard this 3 times, but I'll say it one more time. Affordable housing needs to come first, protecting the environment second, and economic development third. The reason I say it this way, though, we need to keep in mind that all of these issues are linked. But we also need to keep in mind that it's hard to get someone to care about climate change if they don't have somewhere to go home to. If they don't have the ability to put food on their plate or on the plate of their family, they aren't going to worry about something that is a conceptual concept that will happen in the next several years, but they need to get through till next week first. So affordable housing has to come first for that reason, as do all the social services that go along with it. But again, we can do this in a way that protects the environment. We just have to take the time to do it and actually commit to doing so. And then when we talk about economic development, I'll just use the term fiscal responsibility here. Again, it goes back to smart design. If we build a sprawling urban environment, well, ultimately, once that new development gets turned over to the city, the taxpayer bears the cost of maintaining it. Those roads need to be plowed, the water mains need to be maintained, and water needs to be provided to these new residences. So if it isn't done in a way that makes sense, and density always helps with this, it will cost the taxpayer more. So again, these issues are quite complex and they are interconnected, but if we have to rank it, we have to protect each other and help the people in our society who need the most help first before we can worry about anything else.
Thank you. You spoke of my simplistic question. Sorry about that, but let's try to do more
No
of it.
insult, man.
We'll try to do more of a deep dive and stay on this subject. Then on the subject of housing, our vacancy rate is at near all-time lows again, and rents have risen dramatically over the past 4 years. So we aren't creating nearly enough new housing to meet the demand. Our city has some housing growth estimates. However, no one is accountable for delivering on these estimates. So, if elected, will you set new housing unit targets for council and staff to achieve annually? And if no, why? If yes, what targets will you bring to council for approval? A little more specifics here. Mr. Charbonneau.
Thank you, Bill. Yes, I would be in favor of setting targets. I think it's in the same way we should be setting some targets for what we'd like our population to be, because once you start those kind of targets and setting and reaching those goals, a lot of what you need will come along with it. CMHC says we are short 10,000 units in this city, or we'll need that over the next 10 years. So I would say 1,000 units a year is a target that could be achieved. It'll take a lot of work, a lot of cooperation, look for the types of builders that, as Councillor Stroud said in Hamilton, somebody who does the non-profit type of housing, and not only be subject to the big entrepreneurs who want to build these big housing units and walk away with all of the profits. We all work in this together, and I think we can achieve that. It'll be slow. We might only get 500 or 600 the first year, but maybe we double that, and then we get it and we keep going, and we achieve what we need so that this city doesn't have the housing crisis. And if we all pitch in, hopefully the world won't have a crisis of housing.
Thank you. Ms. Glenn?
I do agree with setting targets. I really believe that if you don't have a goal, you don't get anywhere. In terms of how much, this comes down to actually bringing some realism to bear here and having the conversations with our staff and our community about what can we do. It's about stepping forward into saying, how much can we actually manage to do? So it's all great to ask how many right here at this table, but until we go through that full process of doing a really deep dive evaluation again, we can't set concrete numbers. And I don't like to make false promises, so I won't do that to you. When I tell you a number, it's going to be a number that I actually think that we can get to. But on that thing with housing, we have to ensure that we are designing our city in a way that is in keeping with all of the things that we value. So it's not just about putting up houses. If we're concerned about the environment, I think we have to commit to things like the 15-minute city so that we can walk to everything that we need within 15 minutes. So it's not sprawling suburbs. It's designing so that we can take the load off the roads. We got road repair issues. Well, if we were driving less on the roads, we wouldn't have to repair them so much, would we? So this is about a bigger vision for our city. What do we want our city to be? We're going to have to grow, but let's find a way to make the rest of the city as attractive to people as Sydenham is. And I think that will help Sydenham and the city as a whole.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question for Mr. Maassarani. If elected, will you set new housing unit targets for council and staff to achieve annually? If no, why? And if yes, what targets will you bring to council for approval?
Sure. So, I mean, rather than setting targets for new housing, I would actually rather propose we set targets for the percentage of people experiencing homelessness, because the population will change. So we can, if the population increases at a rate that's faster than we anticipate, and we're not adding enough houses, we're just in the same problem all over again. So I'd rather we reframe that a little bit and say, let's actually make sure that the people who live in the city have a place to live, and try to minimize the number of people who don't. So I would rather set targets that way. But again, it goes back to what kind of housing are we promoting? Are we promoting affordable housing? Are we just looking at saying housing and check the box and call it good enough? But then we also look at our current stock of housing. Who lives in the homes that are currently available, and is it suitable for them? And is there a way to revisit that instead? I mean, we hear about, I've spoken to a few seniors who don't necessarily want to live in their 4-bedroom house by themselves, but they just don't have anywhere to go. So by giving them an option to go somewhere where they can live independently and live with the dignity they deserve, that would free up a fair amount of housing units as well. So again, let's not just say, go build more houses and then check the box and the house is done. Let's look at, why do we need more houses, and look at it holistically instead.
Thank you, Mr. Stroud.
Yeah, that question wasn't simplistic, but I find it set off alarm bells for me. Because just think about it. If you say, oh, we're going to build 5,000 new units in this council term, say, so that's a nice round number or 10,000 or 8,000 or whatever number that we throw out, we're picking it out of a hat, right? That doesn't translate to the developer. Like, the developer doesn't have that target, right? This is a target for council. So really all that is another argument at when you get a substandard housing application from a developer. I mean, how do you make money off housing if you're in the private sector? You build as many units as possible for as cheap as possible, that you drive your own costs down, and then you sell it for as high as you can. And how do you achieve that? Well, when you have a housing crisis, the price actually goes up. They've got both right now. They've got high prices, and they're still trying to drive down the cost of their building. Now, sure, there's inflationary pressures on construction, but substandard proposals should not be given extra ammunition to accept them. And that's what I think this target would do. It would compel the councillors that maybe don't take, a long time on the planning applications. They just tick the box. Well, this gets us 200 more closer to our target. I say yes. That's not thoughtful planning. We have some excellent planners in the city, and we need to have standards about our planning applications, and the target doesn't get us there. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think the CMHC does set targets, though, to achieve certain things. So, but I do want to pick up on your theme, Mr. Stroud, for a question for all the candidates here. What do you think of the kinds of housing development that we've seen in this district in recent years? The style, the design, the height, as examples. What will you advocate for as new proposals are brought forward in the coming years in this district? We'll start with Ms. Glenn.
So I think that one of the things that we have not done a good enough job of for Sydenham is making sure that the building is in keeping with the actual character. So what I would advocate for is that we, in our planning, include what I'm going to call a sense of place. And we have the ability to do this. And I think, I love architecture. Been to Chicago a number of times, taken all the architectural tours, and I'm a big fan of Othmar Amon. And if any of you are aware, he has built some of the most beautiful bridges in the world. He was responsible for the Golden Gate Bridge. And I think he put it best, that when we are building, we need to look beyond economy and utility and look to the aesthetic, because nobody wants to live beside an eyesore. And that's the truth. People come to Kingston because it's a beautiful city. We live here because it's a beautiful city. And so if I was going to do one thing to change what's going on in Sydenham and in the city, is that we give consideration to that, but we build it into the documents, and that we have outreach to the community to say, what should that look like? What is the feel that we want for this city? we want to build not just for this lifetime, but for all the lifetimes ahead. That's why we have heritage buildings. They were built well enough that they're still there. And I think we have to give consideration to how we sort of build that all on in.
Thank you. Mr. Maassarani?
Sure. So again, similar theme than what we talked about. We need more housing, but when it comes to the district of Sydenham itself, like, it does need to look a certain way to keep with the character of the neighborhood. And I'm going to echo a lot of Ms. Bunn's comments here. But when we do go to build something new, I think it's about working with the person building it to say, this is what we're looking for, and rather than just rejecting an application because it doesn't meet the requirements, say, do this instead, right? So the people who volunteer their time and work on the Heritage Committee do a really good job of this, but I think they could use a little bit of help to actually try to reconcile the visual identity of the neighborhood or the character of the neighborhood with the need to intensify certain areas of it. So the Central Kingston Growth Strategy did a really good job of speaking to what is important and what are the key parameters that have to be considered when designing new buildings. So visual identity is certainly a big part of that, but also it goes around how you go about using the building. Is there a place to store garbage? What is the parking situation like? What is the front lawn or the landscaping like? So all of these considerations that go beyond just the architecture of the building need to be taken into account, both in terms of user comfort, but also how it impacts the flow, for lack of a better word, of the entire neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Stroud. Your assessment of the type and the kind of housing development we've seen in this district in recent years. Is it big, bold, cute, ugly? And what will you advocate for as new proposals are brought forward in the coming years?
Well, I've had the pleasure of actually meeting some really good developers in the last 8 years, and I'm going to give you a couple examples of some projects that they pulled off that were great. There's one on Earl Street, right across from the Arc, right in the middle, right near Aberdeen, right in the middle of the heavy, what you would call ghetto. He took like two adjacent houses, and he built 24 units, 3 stories high, with their own balconies, separate entrances, back into and parking at the back. It was spectacular. It's still only 3 stories high, so it fits the neighborhood. And he came and had the courtesy of explaining his project to me before he got approval, and of course I supported it. The Anna Lane on Queen Street, Queen and I believe it's Wellington, 8 stories with a car share in the basement. Another great, the Dornicamps came in there and finished that project. Another great development that I was happy to see. The Annandale, which was built 100 years ago, is 5 stories, beautiful high ceiling units. I had the pleasure of living in one for 3 years as a renter. That nobody's ever said, oh, that doesn't fit Sydenham, and that sets the standard. That's the kind of building we should have. I don't know whether we can do it with modern materials at the price to make it worthwhile, but it's something to aspire to. And there's one that hasn't been finished yet, and it's the schoolhouse, the old schoolhouse on Wellington Street. And so that I did speak to the developer on that one, and I advised that he speak to Mrs. Finley, because she is a neighbor on Earl Street to that property, and she would give him some guidance on the heritage, fitting into the heritage district.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Charbonneau, what kind of housing would you like to move into in this district?
One in the district, if I could.
Yeah. Where do you live now, anyway?
I'm an East Ender.
East Ender. Why didn't you run in Pittsburgh?
Because I respect the councillor who's running there very much.
Oh. Okay.
It's hard to go last when there's so much agreement. I don't want to see high rises in this district. We need to keep to the heritage. We have lots of discussions at the Historical Society about such things. I had a constituent ask me the other day about the proposal on the Marine Museum property just behind the shipyards there. Because there was a proposal put in at once, and I certainly didn't want to see something like that go up there. There's a lot of opportunity. I mean, I lived in the Admiralty when I was in the district, and you look at a building that was a warehouse, and now it's such a wonderful example of how to create housing out of something that had outlived its life as a warehouse, on the waterfront, and now it's beautiful housing. you know, a good example of what not to have would be what's going up on Ellerbeck, where they took down a house and suddenly there is this great big, long, huge, out of character building going up. I don't think that was very well planned out, and I think that it has to fit into the neighborhood in many different ways, and there are those opportunities. So,
Thank you. So we talked about housing and we've touched on homelessness, but here's a more direct question on that theme. In recent years, we have seen an increased presence of people experiencing mental illness, addiction, and homelessness manifested on our city streets and in our parks. You often see tents in City Park as you drive by them. What do you understand to be the root causes? And what are your thoughts about what the city can do to address these problems? We'll start with Mr. Maassarani.
I mean, simple answer, where are they going to go? Like, if someone is experiencing homelessness, it's not by choice. They don't have anywhere to go, right? So that's answer number one. Answer number two, people experiencing mental health problems, they just don't have the support that they need. So what can we as a municipality do to help there? So municipal government doesn't have a huge role to play per se in healthcare, but that doesn't mean that the city of Kingston as an organization can't help. So the work that went into developing the integrated care hub that was recently opened, that is extremely helpful and goes a long way, and the work that the people who work there do really should be commended, but we need more of that. I don't think it's fair to say that, oh, well, the rate of homeless people or people with mental health or substance abuse issues on the streets is just not acceptable. Like, we owe it to them to help, and I think that the municipality does have tools that we can use and we have used, but we need to do more of that.
Thank you. Mr. Stroud?
Yeah, well, agreed. Where are they going to go? And root cause of homelessness, again, it's similar to the root causes of the housing crisis itself. I know how much I pay for rent for my place. I rent an apartment right on the corner of City Park. So I'm familiar. I've seen the tents come and go. I've spoken to some of these homeless people, to get their perspective. I do have the skills as a nurse to speak to people with mental illness. They're not all mentally ill, but many of them are. Many of them struggle with substance abuse as well. It's all, again, root causes. So years ago, the provincial government saw fit to basically defund all the institutions the institutional living that they used to have. And this forced many of them out onto the street or into, at first, maybe substandard housing. And then when, prices went up and things got tight, they found themselves on the street again. And it's a double whammy if you're homeless and mentally ill. I'm telling you, the world's a pretty scary place. So I did attempt to address this year, actually, with the pilot of the regulated encampment at Bell Park with simple rules for everyone to follow in exchange for a free place to pitch your tent. You'd have a numbered spot, just like a campground, but you'd have to follow the rules, and if you didn't follow the rules, you'd lose your spot. It was an attempt to meet the homeless halfway, get them to take care of themselves a little bit and live in a regulated place where they could support each other.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, Council did not support that initiative.
Thank you. Mr. Charbonneau, what are your thoughts about what more the city could do to address these problems?
Well, I'd have to agree with Councillor Stroud. I mean, the part of the situation started when the government defunded all of the institutions that people got the help that they needed. And we've become a much worse society in our care of that, and just our general health care is going in the wrong direction. Some people do choose to be out on the street. I've talked to a few people at the integrated hub, and I had been involved in setting up the safe injection site when I was chief of the paramedic service. I think the city, it shouldn't be a download to the city. We see too much of this downloading, and healthcare is not necessarily a city function. But I think we can work with the government to try and find the healthcare resources. This city is missing a lot of doctors because of the formula that's used. That still keeps counting in researchers. Research is very important. I think research is fundamental to us moving ahead as a society. But we need more doctors and all healthcare workers here to improve the mental health of everybody.
Thank you. Ms. Glenn?
Well, this is an issue I'm well acquainted with. So I mentioned Turning Point Youth Services that I chaired the board with. And so we dealt with youth who had mental health issues, addiction issues, were in trouble with the law, who were homeless. And so it's a multifaceted approach that we have to take. Yes, we have to push back to the Ontario government for some increased funding to deal with the issue, but we're far from the only municipality that's doing this. So we need a stronger voice from AMO. And we need to have that funding come back. But in terms of the solutions for this, and this is again, we agree on the causes, but how are we going to solve it? Well, it is a social service and a public health model where we need to identify our homeless population, understand their particular issues and needs. We need to repeatedly follow up with them to get them into service. And yes, to the point that we are lacking healthcare providers, but it's not just physicians. We are stuck in this model of always reaching for physicians, reaching for psychiatrists, psychologists, and yet we have a wealth of other healthcare professionals that could help to fill that gap. You know, 10 years ago, we regulated mental health providers here in the province. We have the College of Psychotherapists, and it is a vast array of people who can help with those mental health issues, and we need to be looking for them to support the system. So in terms of solutions here, we are lacking a bit of shelter space as well. And I see that my time's just about up, so
You're right.
Talk to me later. I'm happy to fill you in on the rest of the solutions I have in mind.
Okay, thank you. Candidates, we're running short on time. Time flies. Quick question about, not really a quick question, but last question about the environment. Okay, that's what we're going to focus on. It's a bit of a multi-part question. Where climate change once seemed to make, to many, to be like an abstract idea, many people now feeling personally impacted as they experience its symptoms. So what are your views on climate change, and what change do you feel you could affect at the very local role as a city councillor? What has the city accomplished on the environmental front that most impresses you? What other actions should Kingston be taking in the next 4 years? Right, Mr. Stroud?
Yeah. Well, we declared a climate emergency right away. Yeah, that was awesome. No, I'm joking because it's really easy to greenwash. It's really hard to actually do it. And some of my colleagues on council did a lot of talking about climate change and climate action, but if you look at what motions they brought to council, there aren't any. So I doubled the budget for the neighborhood tree planting program because the year before those trees sold out. And what that is a 90% subsidy by the city to get a fairly mature tree, like a large caliper tree, right? On private property, on your own property, not city property, on your own property. And they drop it off. You have to dig the hole, but they drop off the tree if you pay, and it's so cheap. Or maybe you have to pick it up, but it's like $10 to $15 a tree. But we sold out the first year, so we doubled it for the next year, and that also sold out. So that's a concrete thing that was my own initiative. There's a lot I could talk on this, but essentially, why do I focus on trees? Trees are cheap. They're value for money. They're really cheap for what they do because they grow for free. If they're taken care of, once in a while, they grow for free year over year. Their canopy gets bigger. Their carbon sequestration grows. Everything for free. You can't get a better engineered solution to fight climate change than just planting thousands and thousands and thousands of trees.
Thank you. Mr. Charbonneau.
I agree we need lots of trees. And that program should be doubled and quadrupled, and let's plant the trees. But the other things I think we need to do is really it goes back to how we develop the city, and Connie touched on it, where you can get everything you need within a 15-minute walk. If people can do that, they're not going to be getting in their cars, and that's going to be a huge effect on the climate change. I also think we need to make sure that being located where we are along the 401 corridor, that there's the opportunity for lots of charging stations for people who are going back and forth, not only locally, but even the people who are coming to visit. We have these big buses coming in here all the time with lots of pollution downtown. Well, there is technology coming out around electric buses, large electric buses. Hopefully they'll start start those on the tours buses like we have on our city buses. That's another thing we can do, is continue. I love it when I see that electric bus go by and I think, wow, even in my industry, they're actually bringing out an electric ambulance, and it'll hit the market in 2 years. I think we need a combination of that. So my biggest thing would be, let's look at how we develop the city in pockets of smaller communities where you can become that walkable, livable city, and you don't need to have the car. And that's what we've seen with some of the developers downtown, is they're cutting down.
Thank you, Ms. Glenn.
Well, Paul, I think you're stealing my thunder on the 15-minute city thing. In terms of what I think Kingston has done so far, I think we have made some reasonable efforts, but I also agree that declaring a climate emergency and then having the hypocrisy to continue to bring some activities into the city, for example, the poker run, it's a polluter, and I find that problematic. Now, I also understand the economic concerns the city has. So I want to grow green. So in addition to the 15-minute city, we need that 100-kilometer farm, and we have a food crisis. And I think we can actually do more than one thing at a time with becoming the hydroponics capital of Ontario. Why are we not delving into this? This is an opportunity to continue to grow food when seasonally we're struggling the most with food and food insecurity. It's the opportunity to bring a business into this city that contributes on its tax base, contributes food, and allows us not to be importing food from so far away. We also, as a community, need to become far more carbon literate. I think oftentimes we don't understand the actual carbon cost of things. So, we're going electric. Electric cars are great, but right at the moment, there's a lot of people out there who don't realize that if you've got a gas-powered vehicle that's in great repair, it costs less in terms of carbon than what it does to build that new electric. We're eventually going to get there, but it has to be phased.
All right, thank you. Mr. Maassarani?
I'm going to apologize ahead of time for going over the 90 seconds here. So when we talk about sustainability, I think we need to look at it from the human aspect, the environmental aspect, and the fiscal aspect. Again, these three things are not mutually exclusive. We can implement solutions that protect the environment, that create a better quality of life for people, and that save on the municipality's budget. One example is transportation. If we make it easier for people to navigate the city without having to rely on their car, we ease congestion, we lower our emissions, we make it more affordable for people to travel, which is better. And if you're able to bike around, there's health benefits there. So again, these things are certainly are intertwined and connected, and we just need to keep that in mind as we go through and designing solutions. One thing to keep in mind as well is that the impacts of climate change are no longer abstract. They are here. We are feeling them. We are experiencing droughts. We are experiencing heat waves, and that is going to have and severe weather events, and it rained a lot the last few days, and that's just going to keep happening. It's going to keep getting worse. So how do we adapt our infrastructure to meet the changes that we are experiencing right now as everyone goes to cooler homes in the summer because it's a lot hotter? The electricity grid is going to feel that, and it's going to lead to some potential danger to the community. So something to keep in mind there. What I've really been impressed with the city in Kingston is the Greener Homes Kingston program is a fantastic way to lower the emissions associated with the existing housing stock. Fantastic. However, the problem there is that it is limited to people who own a home. Landlords can apply as well. Sure, what's the incentive? Not really, because they're not paying the utilities. So I think just trying to expand that a little bit to rental units as well would go over a long way.
Thank you. Can I just ask the indulgence of organizers for one more question? One more quick question, quick answer. Do you mind? It's a church, right? They're not going to kick us out, right? Right. I think people would be interested in this question because, you know, you want to be an elected official, right? You talk a lot about what you want to do and fix a city and all that. Being a councillor is considered a part-time role, okay? So how much time do you personally have to dedicate to this position? All right, Mr. Charbonneau, I'm going to limit the answers to 30 seconds. If you can't answer it in 30 seconds, forget it. Mr. Charbonneau. 30 seconds.
I'm retired, so I have lots of time to dedicate, and I think that is a problem for some people, and I would love to answer a question around council composition and how the city governance should continue, but you only gave me 30 seconds, Bill.
Yeah, you just used all of them pretty much. That it then? Yeah, okay. Ms. Glenn?
I'm done.
Ms. Glenn?
Well, I have the good fortune of owning my own business, and what I have done here in the city of Kingston is I've actually hired full-time employees. I have a team behind me, so I've allowed myself to be available to actually fulfill this role. I really hope to be able to do that with you. So yes, I have the time because I have the team.
Okay, Mr. Maassarani, 10 hours, 20 hours a week, 50 hours, 80 hours, what?
Yeah, so certainly still very much in the early-ish stages of my career. So, but that said, I understand the commitment that comes with being a councillor for a municipality the size of Kingston. It's that awkward in between of not quite a full-time job, but also not a full-time job. But what I can promise, I will commit the time that it takes to do this job properly. And I filed my paperwork on the last day because that's how hard I thought about the decision. I will do this properly if I get elected. So I'll leave it at that. If anyone has any questions, I'll happily answer them later.
Thank you, Mr. Stroud.
Yeah, the truth is, as a first-time councillor, there's a steep learning curve. I found this out myself in 2014. In that first year of council, it was at least 40 hours a week, if not 50, just for council. Plus, I had a part-time nursing job at the same time and 3 young children. What I really admired Councillor Schell at the time, because she, former accountant, she really was good at time management. So actually, that was a big part of my learning curve, was time management. So in other words, get a lot more efficient with your time.
Thank you. We have no more time to talk about time, all right? We're going to move to the closing statements now, okay? 3 minutes each, reverse order from the opening statements. Hopefully I got this right. We're going to start with Peter Stroud. Closing statements, please.
So my predecessor, Bill Glover, had served 2 terms on council, and he filled me in a little bit at the very beginning when he saw that I was running, but he really didn't tell me the whole story. He took off after two terms, and because, he was like a little bit of a mentor to me, because I didn't know anything about council before I started, I thought that was just the norm, that you do 2 terms and you're done, just like the President of the United States. So I actually hadn't planned ahead to run a 3rd time, but when I got to a year ago when I had to make that decision, I actually spoke to a couple other people that I thought might be good at it. They didn't take it up, they didn't go for it, and I basically had to choose between leaving it up to random chance, or keep doing what I thought I had already learned to do pretty well. Like, not put that 8 years of learning curve just to waste and maybe do it for another term. My children are still here. All the reasons are still there. We're still under all the same pressures. So I feel like I'm getting somewhere. So that's why I stood again for the 3rd term. And also, when I'm speaking to people in the neighborhood, I really feel like the support is still there. People appreciate the work I did. If I didn't feel like I was appreciated, I wouldn't come back. So I'd like to thank you all for that, for the kind words when I got a nice email today from a constituent, summed up some of the things that I'd done for his neighborhood, and it really, that's what I get out of it. I don't do it for the money, that's for sure. I do it to make Sydenham a better place for my children, and to uphold the standards of, not only the way the street looks, the way the parks look, and the way people treat each other to a higher standard. And if I can just sort of inspire the next generation to do it as well, because I can't do it forever, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Charbonneau.
Thank you. I feel I have a lot to contribute. I truly believe that you can't sit on the sidelines and complain about what your government is doing if you're not prepared to take some action. I believe listening is very, very important. Years ago when I was on the James Bay coast, I was at a band council meeting. I was presenting about paramedic service. And after I presented, there was this elongated silence. And I turned to the coordinator of the response team and I said, "What's going on?" And she said to me, "You white men, you're so uncomfortable with silence." I said, "Okay." She said, "They're thinking. They've listened, and now they're thinking. And they will tell you what they think when they're ready." And they were right. I used that all my career. It's very interesting when you just be silent, how much people will start to come out and talk to you and really get out what's on their mind. It's time for change. We're at a pivotal point, I believe, in this city that 6 councillors are not returning. That is a large number. Maybe some of the incumbents won't either. But as I said earlier, Shrek always said, "Change is good, donkey." But change needs to be managed. It needs to be managed on the end that people are excited for the change, but you also have to help the people who are not excited about the change come to understand why the change will eventually be better for everybody. I want to be part of that change. I want to help lead that change with you over the next 4 years.
Thank you. Ms. Glenn.
Well, I want to address the question I didn't get asked, which was why I'm running in Sydenham. So I don't live in the district. And I think when I've been asked the question, I'm like, why wouldn't I? Sydenham is at the heart of Kingston. And if the heart of the city isn't well, the rest of the city suffers. And I think that when you decide to run for office, apply for a job, you pick what you're going to do best at. And all of my interests lie here. So I think this is where I could do the most good for Sydenham and for the city as a whole. So that's why I'm running here, and I hope that you'll consider electing me. As Paul's mentioned, we are in a time of great change. I'm accustomed to managing change. As I've said, I've managed to weather being a business owner for 25 years, and to not just survive, but to thrive, to be able to expand, to be able to open up opportunities, to be able to participate in solutions to disability issues and healthcare issues. And I want to do the same thing here for Sydenham, for Kingston. And with doing that, it's about bringing both passion and intellect to the problem. I think everybody in this room cares. But to get to good solutions, we need to be able to evaluate what's in front of us and then pick a course of action that's actually going to get us the results we want. I don't know about you, but I really believe that past performance is the best indicator of future success. So I'm going to urge you to look at my past performance. I've regulated a healthcare profession. I've led a successful business. I've advocated on behalf of mental health issues. I've been active in public health. And I could go on, but you're welcome to go read my resume and see all the things that I've been able to do. And I want to do that for you. So I've been knocking on the doors. I've been listening. One of the issues we didn't talk a lot about was roads and road safety. I heard you, and I'm committed to also having a look at those safety issues because they matter to me. I would like to be able to walk across the street easily as well. So if you want solutions, that's what I'm going to provide, and I'm going to get it done. So I look forward to talking with you more, to the rest of the campaign period, and to continuing to work with you in the future, hopefully as your counselor.
Thank you. Mr. Maassarani.
Thank you. So I just want to close by reiterating the fact that, I have worked as a public servant for my entire professional career. I intend to continue to do so regardless of the outcome of this election because I believe in the importance of public service. I understand how all the issues are connected. I understand that climate change is linked to the economy, is linked to human health, and I understand that we can develop solutions to all these problems, but we just have to try. Which leads me to my next point about maintaining civility in our discourse. We have seen that slip a little bit. We see that it is a lot harder for us to have hard conversations with each other, and that we're all very invested in our individual point of views to the point where we can't talk to someone who has a different one than us anymore. And I think that needs to change, and that's certainly something that I am prepared to do. I'm prepared to listen with empathy, and just talk. And sometimes that means having hard conversations, and that's okay because we have to. That's where we are, and if we hope to make the better world for the rest of us, for all of us, like, we have to have these hard conversations. And really, I am motivated to try to push for this change because I intend on living in Kingston for a very long time. My family lives here, my child lives here, and I want to make it a better place for all of us. So I am motivated to do so. Which again leads me to my next point. Regardless of the outcome of this election, really what I'm going to urge everyone is let's just work together. Like, we have to work together to come up with solutions to all these problems and take the time to be empathetic to someone else's problems. Again, we're all very much invested in the issues that are important to us, but there are other issues affecting different people in different ways, and we have to take the time to listen if we are going to move forward as a community and as a society. So that leads me to my last point in terms of what I promise to do if I'm elected. I promise to try. I will work to represent everyone in the district, so be it longtime residents to students who are only here for 4 years, to the best of my ability. I promise that I will listen to everyone. I will listen to everyone with empathy. I will listen to the people who don't usually have a chance to speak up, and I will do my best to represent you at City Hall. Just last closing thought here, 1 second. Last but not least, the last promise I will make is I will always act with empathy, and I will always act with integrity. That's the standard that I will strive towards, and that's the standard that you will be able to hold me to. So, thank you.
All right, so that's going to wrap up the 2022 Sydenham District Association All-Candidates Meeting. Thank you to each of the 4 candidates for participating tonight. Good luck in your campaigns as the election gets closer. Sorry we couldn't get to every topic we wanted to tonight, but I guess we are going to get kicked out of here after all. For the audience, I hope it was informative for you from what the candidates had to say. Thank you for inviting me, and I'll turn it over to an SDA member now to officially close the meeting. Thank you.
I'd like to just repeat a little bit of what Bill said. Thank you to everybody for attending this evening, including the candidates. Thank you for coming. And Bill, thank you for moderating this for us. We very much appreciate it. There has never been a more important time for democracy to thrive, and it starts among our houses and in our neighborhoods. So thank you for being part of this democratic process this year. This is a reminder, voting starts online next week, October 5th. And advance polls are open from October 18th through the October 22nd. Election day is October 24th. We'd also like to suggest that everyone read the September 2022 edition of the Village Pump, the SDA newsletter, which is available on our website, and you don't have to be a member to sign up for the newsletter. It includes questions and answers from the candidates, including some issues that may not have been covered at this meeting. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good night.
Thank you so much, Paul. Very well done. Thanks, Rami. Nice to finally meet you.
Great. All the best, Paul. Thank you. Good to meet you. Good to see you again. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Bill.
Nice to meet you. Good luck on the campaign. Thank you. Great to meet you. What a nice group of people. And well-informed. You're also well-informed.
Try.
Too bad, like in Highlander, there can only be one.
I know, right?